Good morning, everyone. Welcome to episode 30 of Ask a Property Manager. No, I'm sorry, episode 31 of Ask a Property Manager. Today is July 29th, 2020, coming to you from Studio 2.0 here at Own Buffalo. I'm Andrew Schultz, principal broker of Own Buffalo Inc., and on today's show, we're going to be answering a bunch of questions from landlords around the country. Before we jump into that, we're going to plug our social media. New episodes of Ask a Property Manager drop every Wednesday morning, 10 a.m. Eastern. You can find those live on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Buffalo Foreclosed Homes. You can also find those on our YouTube page, generally on the same day that we drop them on Facebook. Grab a link for that over at our website of ownbuffalo.com. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram as well. We post different content there than we would post on our Facebook and our YouTube page. So be sure that you're looking out for us there as well. Don't forget that you can grab a free 30-minute consultation with me over at ownbuffalo.com as well. I do have a couple of time slots available still for this week, and then I do have some time slots open for next week as well. The new episode of the Rent Prep for Landlords podcast comes out tomorrow as well. That drops every Thursday morning, everywhere podcasts can be heard. On tomorrow's show, we're going to be discussing how to handle multiple rental applications, specifically how to reject the applications you're not going to be pursuing, how to find and pursue a tenant for rent or damages that were left unpaid after they've moved out, as well as talking about mechanical upgrades to your rental. So don't miss out on that. As I mentioned, new episodes drop every Thursday morning. You can get that anywhere podcasts are heard or over at rentprep.com/podcast. Let's jump right into our first question. This one's about air conditioner maintenance. I have a triplex and one of the units has central AC. Do you guys do the maintenance on your AC, or do you have tenants be responsible for that? I assume that you're talking about things like the filters and stuff like that. Generally speaking, getting tenants to change filters can be a little bit of a headache. There are some services out there like Second Nature. I believe that's the name of the company, Second Nature. And what they can do is deliver filters on a recurring basis, on a regular schedule to your tenant directly, with instructions on how to swap the filters out and things like that. That being said, we've found that most tenants don't necessarily do that. We'll walk in and there might be a stack of filters because tenants aren't changing them or something like that. So we definitely recommend servicing all sorts of heating and air conditioning equipment yourself. Don't make that a tenant responsible item, because it's one of those things that if they don't do their due diligence and you have a catastrophic issue, something breaks or whatever, it's going to be a very costly repair. So you're better off handling that maintenance yourself, not leaving it to the tenant, and making sure that you're keeping your unit in good shape. That's what I would do in a situation like that. Trying to get tenants to comply with doing maintenance type items like that's generally a tough thing to do. Disappearing tenants. After I posted a 7-day notice, I've come to the property and there's a sign on the front door with the key taped to it saying, "Take your key, please." Looking through the window, I see furniture and clothing, and the AC is pumping. No one seems to be home, but there's a van in the driveway. I don't think it's working. There's furniture on the front and back porch. They are not answering my text messages. What does this mean, and what do I do? In MI, I think that's Michigan. 2 roommates moved in May and never paid June, just stopped responding to me in June after saying no money. Update, the key is gone and there's a car in the driveway. So it depends on what the current laws are in your state with regards to filing evictions and things like that. Sounds like you served the 7-day notice, which more than likely is the initiation of the eviction procedure in your state. So if you're covered under a moratorium right now, certainly make sure that you're following the rules and guidelines regarding that. If you are in a situation where you can move forward with an eviction, that's what you should be doing here. Continue that eviction through to the end. Contact, the utility companies. Well, I guess the electric is on because the air conditioner is running. I would contact the utility companies. Some of them are better than others about providing information to landlords, but I would ask them, is the utility on? Is there a shut-off notice in place? Things like that, just to see. That's a kind of an idea of how. One of the ways that we check to see if someone's still living in a place is if they still have the utilities on in their name, because one of the first things most people will do when they move is turn off the utilities so they're not responsible for those bills any longer. So that would be one of the phone calls that I would make. Sounds like you probably have some interior condition concerns as well. If you have a concern that you can if you have a lease clause that'll allow you to do an inspection on the unit with a 24-hour notice, I would recommend maybe posting a 24-hour notice and doing an inspection on the unit as well. We'll get to that a little bit further down in the show today. I'm going to talk about that specific clause and what to put in your lease so that you can do those types of inspections by giving 24 hours notice. But that might be more of a, we'll get to that later. That might be more of a state-by-state thing. Let's see. The main thing here is don't just assume that these tenants are gone and start throwing stuff out. Sounds to me like they're still in possession of the unit. They're still living there or partially living there, whatever the case may be. It doesn't sound to me as though the property is abandoned per se. So I think that you're probably going to have to take this one all the way through a full eviction procedure. You may want to talk to your attorney and ask them what the rules are regarding abandoned property and abandoned apartments in your state, just so that you have clarification on that. I know in our lease it states that if a tenant has left the property for more than 14 days without notifying us, there's a couple of other things written in there too, that it is considered abandonment, but that's actually because we talked to our attorney and wrote that clause specifically to make sure that it's in compliance here in the great state of New York. Tenant requested repairs. So this is a little bit longer. I'll read it to you. Tenant hasn't moved in yet, but asked to upgrade a 30 to 40-year-old thermostat, a manual that has had no issues, because they want the ability to change the temperature away from home. They suggested that they will install it, tenant is an electrician, and reinstall the old one at move out. The owner's considering letting them install one as long as the old one is given to the owner and the new one stays once they move out. It could be a nice feature for future tenants. However, the owner is concerned about any possible issues with the new thermostat and potentially not being able to reinstall the old one if it dies once it's removed. Experience suggests old manual items are better quality and are better left alone. Thoughts? So you've got a couple of different questions here. The first thing I want to talk about is the tenant requested repairs. I prefer a manual thermostat as well. I don't run a digital thermostat even at my own place. It's a manual, the Honeywell round style that you just twist. That's all I want. I want that level of control on my heat and my cooling, so I don't use a digital myself. I prefer the manual ones. They're becoming more and more popular, and as smart home technology rolls out, more and more tenants are going to be looking for and requesting these smart home features like thermostats and things like that. All of that being said, changing out a thermostat basically amounts to 2 to 4 wires, depending on if you have heat and AC or just heat. So it's not like it's a major changeover to go from one thermostat to another. It's literally a few screws and maybe a mounting plate for the new thermostat versus the old thermostat. It's not a major structural change or anything like that. Once it's attached to the home, I would consider that to be a fixture, and the tenant should be leaving that when they move out. I don't think that they should be, swapping it in just for the time that they're living there and then swapping it out. All that being said, if the tenant was to do it after they moved in, the chances of you catching it, unless you're doing inspections, are pretty slim anyway. So that's something to consider. It's a pretty minor change, all things considered. What I would probably do in this situation is, if the tenant pays for the thermostat, have the owner pay for the labor. Or if the tenant wants to install it for free, it sounds like they're an electrician. If they're licensed as an electrician, you probably don't have too much to worry about. I still don't like the idea of tenants doing work on a property, any work on a property. That's kind of what the purpose of the landlord's job is to make sure that the property's maintained. So it's kind of up to you if you want to have the tenant install it or not. I personally would either do it myself because it's such an easy task, or hire a handyman or somebody to come in and do it. I would stipulate with the tenant, and you get this in writing, that they pay for the thermostat, you pay for the labor, but the thermostat remains a fixture as part of the house when the tenant moves out. So that's pretty critical, is that part, making sure that the thermostat remains when the tenant moves out. Another thing I wanted to touch on is the old style thermostats. And I did pull this up on the screen here, so hopefully you guys can see it. So the older style thermostats have a little glass ampule in them, and that generally contains mercury. And if you're talking a 30 or 40-year-old thermostat, I can almost guarantee if you pull the front cover off of it, you're going to see something exactly like what's on the screen right now, where you'll see the little ampule with the silver liquid in it. Generally, that silver liquid is mercury. So you can't just turn around and throw these old thermostats in the garbage either. You need to find out what you need to do to properly dispose of those, because mercury is a toxic metal. It's an element. You guys need to make sure that you're taking care of that properly. So that's something to consider as well. I do agree that the older ones tend to work the best. As a matter of fact, the manual that I have in my house has the old mercury ampule in it. But it is something to keep in mind that that's not the way that they're made anymore. They don't use the little glass ampules with the mercury inside of them anymore. They move to a little bit different system. So even if you're using a non-digital thermostat, it's definitely going to be a different style than what the older ones are with that little ampule in them. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Do you need to swap that out? Is it a hazard? No, not necessarily. I mean, unless somebody physically removes the cover and breaks the mercury ampule and like plays with the mercury, probably not an issue. But if you're going to be swapping out for a digital thermostat that can be controlled with a cell phone or something like that, just keep in mind that when you go to remove this one and reinstall it, if you decide not to keep that digital, that you do have that mercury there that you need to deal with. Over the range microwaves. The microwave above the stove broke, and it had a built-in hood, but there was no exhaust connection. So because it is ductless, it would just blow the hot air out of the top. The tenant requested a new microwave with a hood. I explained that there's no exhaust connection and there's no easy way to install it. It's a Flexicore building. The kitchen is on the outside wall. The unit is on the first floor, etc., etc. I was planning to buy a regular over-the-stove microwave without the ductless vent option because it's much less expensive. Can the tenant demand that I get a ductless one even though it's completely pointless? I don't know if they actually make microwaves, over-the-range microwaves that don't have some kind of a vent built into them. I think that that's actually a code requirement in most states to have some sort of ventilation if you're going to have something hanging over the stove within a certain distance. So if it's, you know, a microwave, I've never seen a microwave that doesn't have a vent on it. So that's something to keep in mind. I don't know if you'll even find one of those. I don't know if those exist. With regards to, you know, venting it out of the building versus recirculate venting, you know, if you don't have the vents already there to run to the outside, I would just set it up to do a recirculating vent just like the existing one did. Even if it's not recirculating, it's still being run through some sort of filtration, however slight that filtration might be, to remove some of the oil and grease particulate and some of the smell and smoke and stuff like that before it vents it back out. So it does serve a purpose. Definitely a vent to the outside would be, you know, the top tier option. It doesn't sound like that's an option here. So I would just go with the microwave that has the standard vent and do the ductless, the recirculating option. One thing that I do want to mention is to make sure that you're changing those filters on the underside of the vents regularly. And it doesn't matter if it's the microwave style or even just a normal vent hood. Make sure you're changing or cleaning those filters regularly, because they do trap a fair amount of oil and grease and, you know, stink and stuff like that. Over time, they will get gross. So just make sure you're swapping those out and cleaning everything, maintaining the vent blades and stuff like that. Usually when you pull the filter off, you'll be able to see the blades and you can clean those up so they're not getting gunky as well. So just something to keep in mind when you're talking about those over-the-range microwaves. And by the way, over-the-range microwaves, if you're putting in a microwave or you're putting in a kitchen set, over-the-range microwaves are a really nice selling point for tenants because it eliminates a microwave from the countertop. It gives them that much more countertop space to do what they want to do. So if you have the ability to do an over-the-range microwave, I would certainly recommend it. It's a nice touch. Selling to a tenant. What are your thoughts and how would you respond? About 2 years ago, a renter asked if I would be interested in selling. I gave him a price, but it wasn't mentioned again until recently. Would you feel obligated to honor the same price you verbally gave him almost 2 years ago? If not, how would you respond without sounding greedy? The home value has gone up, but if the home value went down, I doubt he would want to pay the higher price I first gave. Let me know your thoughts. Yeah, I would agree with you. If the property value had gone down, certainly they would not want to pay, you know, a higher price for the property based off of the verbal conversation you had 2 years ago. So the likewise also needs to hold true that if the property value goes up, that the tenant can't expect that they're going to pay market price from 2 years ago. Markets change constantly. When we're comping a property for sale, we're looking at usually the last 6 months of a given market to see what's been happening in that market. So if you're talking, you know, 2 years ago that this conversation was, you're way outside of that 6-month kind of benchmark that we use as real estate agents and brokers when we're looking at pricing of properties. So I don't think that it's unrealistic to say the property's worth more now than it was when the tenant initially asked. assuming the property's in the same condition and this and that and the other thing. We're apples to apples here. What would I do? I would probably not have, I would probably pay for an appraisal, to be honest with you, in a situation like this. You're going to spend probably $350, $450 to have an appraisal done. But what that does is it gives you a completely independent opinion of what the value of the value of the property is. And then there's really not really room to argue. You're not coming up with the sale price. The tenant's not coming up with the sale price. You're not using Zestimates from Zillow. You might be able to get away with a real estate agent, like a broker's price opinion or a competitive market analysis, something like that. I would probably go with an appraiser, though, because that's a true independent third party, and I would pick up the cost of it if you're planning on selling the property. And the reason I say that is because the tenant's going to have to pay for another appraisal as part of their purchase, assuming they're taking a mortgage. So I would bite the bullet and eat that first appraisal, get the price, and talk to the tenant and go from there. You guys don't have anything in writing from 2 years ago. It's not like he was under contract to purchase the home at that price or anything like that. So that would probably be the way that I would handle it, would be to get an appraisal. Once you understand what the price is, if the tenant wants to proceed, then go that route. Tenant storage in common areas. How to handle tenants who have too much storage in the common area of the basement. I store supplies down there and I use as a work area, and tenants are supposed to store stuff only on shelves and some floor storage. One tenant treating this area as if it's their personal storage area. So the first thing you want to do here is remove any ambiguity as to what is the tenant's space for storage things and what is not the tenant's space for storage of things. It sounds like there might be a little bit of ambiguity here as to how much of the space the tenants really have access to or are allowed to use or whatever. Make it crystal clear what the tenants are able to and not able to use in terms of storage in the basement. Sometimes if you've got a big enough basement, you might want to just build out a small, like a small storage room. And it's not like it would cost a huge amount of money. You're basically talking some stud work and some pieces of plywood just to give it some sides or whatever. But that way they have a clearly defined space as to where they're supposed to be storing stuff, and you can write right into the lease that anything stored outside of that area is just subject to being thrown out because it's not being stored properly. So that would be step one. Take all the ambiguity out of the situation. And then once you've done that, talk to the tenant and make sure that they understand where it is that they can store stuff and where they can't store stuff. If it continues to be an issue, then I would go into some kind of a written warning, letting them know, hey, you're still not storing your stuff where you're supposed to. If there's still stuff stored outside of your storage space by X date, and give them however much time you need to give them by law in your state, then we're going to dispose of the stuff at your expense or whatever the case may be. So that's how I would handle that. Make sure that the tenant really truly understands what is their storage space, what is not their storage space, and just make it very, very clear before you proceed too deep in that. Routine inspections. Does anyone specifically state in their lease that they will conduct biannual inspections to ensure plumbing, wiring, smoke detectors, etc. are in good working order? Or if you do this, do you just do it with reasonable notice? Or can you write an addendum saying the tenant allows for inspections for maintenance? Tenants failed to notify us of some much needed repairs, and now we're left with a monster project that could have been remedied on a much smaller scale had we just known. How do we manage this when they tell us nothing? Also, they were supposed to keep up on yard waste removal and did nothing. So again, we'd like to check it out and make sure they are doing it. We're in California. I don't know what the laws are in California. You have a situation in California where the laws tend to be very, very heavily in favor of the tenants. So much like the state of New York, the first thing that I would do would be consult with an attorney or review the law yourself if you can get a hold of a copy of it and understand what exactly your obligations are when it comes to notifying tenants of inspections and things like that. Here in the great state of New York, we have to give a 24-hour notice. So what I did was just clipped the clause from our lease. Access to premises. The owner reserves the right to enter the residence at reasonable times to inspect, make necessary repairs, supply services, or show it to prospective tenants, residents, purchasers, mortgagees, workmen, contractors. Whenever practical, a 24-hour notice of the owner's intent to enter shall be given to the resident. The owner may also display for rent or for sale signs on the building of which the rented residence is a part. We always give 24 hours notice. Unless it's an emergency situation, like we have an upstairs bathroom that's leaking into a downstairs bathroom and the upstairs tenant's not home, like we're going to enter the apartment for that. That's an emergency. But otherwise, we're always providing a 24-hour notice to our tenants before we enter their unit. Even for routine maintenance calls, when we call to schedule that with the tenant, we're always giving those tenants at least 24 hours notice before that maintenance job is set to occur. So that's something that you're going to want to look into. In terms of doing inspections, we do them every 6 months. We do a biannual, and we're looking for basically the things that you're talking about. We're checking the plumbing. We're running the water to make sure that the plumbing is all functional, that there's no supply side leaks, that there's no drain side leaks. So we're checking under sinks, and we notify tenants as to what we're doing as well so that they're not blindsided, because people store stuff under their sinks and whatever. So we let tenants know, we're going to be looking under sinks to make sure that there aren't any leaks and stuff like that. Please make sure that you have that area cleaned out for us. We're checking smoke and CO detectors. This is a good time to replace batteries if you need to in smoke and CO detectors. We're making sure that they still are in place, because a lot of times you'll get tenants that take those down, and then checking to make sure that they are still functional. So smoke and CO detectors, plumbing, wiring. We do check outlets to make sure that somebody doesn't have a power strip daisy chaining to another power strip, daisy chaining to another power strip, daisy chaining to an electric space heater, because that's going to cause a fire for sure. We also watch for electric space heaters because those are explicitly banned in our lease. We do not allow electric space heaters in our lease. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. Check your windows. Make sure that your windows open and shut and that there's no cracks or breaks. Looking for signs of obvious damage. Looking for signs of tenants that don't actually belong there because they're not on the lease. Something along those lines. But definitely make sure that you have a lease clause that does give you permission to enter the apartment in the event that you need to, with 24 hours notice or 48 hours notice, whatever the requirement is in your state. And there might even be some states out there that don't actually have any sort of a provision for this. There are some states that might say that the tenant has to authorize the landlord to come in or something like that. I'm not certain of that. I don't know the laws for every state. All I can tell you is what I've experienced here and go from there. But definitely check your state laws, especially in California. I will mention that because California does have very, very tenant-friendly laws. So you're going to want to make sure that you're taking care of that stuff on the front end. Guys, that pretty much wraps things up for us here today. Thank you so much for watching. We love producing Ask a Property Manager, and you can always help us to improve. Drop a question in the comments either on Facebook or on YouTube, and your question may be picked up in an upcoming episode. If you enjoyed this content or if we brought some value to your day, please do us a favor and hit that thumbs up button. YouTube and Facebook both push videos based on community feedback, so every like, comment, subscription, and share helps us to grow and reach more people. Next week's episode will air live on August 5th at 10 a.m. Eastern. We're going to be back with another show you're not going to want to miss. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you next week.